Charlie had always been by Lucas's side. From the very first day he arrived at the farm, the border collie showed a special affinity for the boy. For Sarah, Lucas's mother, it was a relief to know that her son had someone so reliable by his side, especially because of the boy's deafness. Lucas was only 8 years old, and although he was smart and independent for his age, Sarah's worries about him were constant. The farm was a beautiful, vast place full of life, but it also hid dangers that Lucas, being unable to hear, might not notice. Mornings on the farm always began the same way. Lucas would run out to the fields right after breakfast, followed closely by Charlie, who never let the boy out of sight. The dog, always alert, seemed to understand that he needed to keep an eye on everything. He was well acquainted with the signs and gestures Lucas used to communicate, and this silent connection between them was remarkable. They moved as one, understanding each other with simple glances and movements. As the boy explored the terrain, Charlie stayed close by. The surrounding nature, with its ancient trees and vast fields, provided the perfect backdrop for outdoor play. Lucas, oblivious to the sounds the world emitted, lived in a bubble of tranquility while the dog acted as a sentinel, alert to any changes in the environment. To Charlie, Lucas was his responsibility, and there wasn't a second he would leave him alone. The routine was simple, but it was enough to keep Lucas happy and safe. The afternoons were marked by their return to the house, dirty from the dirt and full of untold stories, yet understood in silence. Sarah watched from a distance, sometimes with a weary smile, knowing that Charlie took care of everything. The dog needed no commands, as he seemed to understand his role better than anyone. Life on the farm had its share of challenges, but the day-to-day was generally peaceful. However, Sarah never ceased to warn Lucas about the dangers he couldn't hear, the wild animals that sometimes roamed the more distant areas of the property. Although Lucas was aware of this, he trusted Charlie more than anything else. The dog was his guide, protector, and best friend, and so far, that had always been enough to ensure both their safety. Charlie, with his vigilant gaze, always seemed to be one step ahead. Every movement Lucas made was closely followed, and the dog never completely relaxed. There was something in the way Charlie observed the world around him that made it clear he knew what he was doing. This trust between the boy and the dog maintained balance in their daily lives, a silent harmony that Sarah watched with relief and gratitude. The days on the farm continued peacefully, with Lucas and Charlie maintaining their routine of exploring the fields. However, as summer progressed, the heat increased, and the nature around began to transform. Sarah knew that this time of year brought certain risks. The intense heat caused dangerous animals, such as snakes, to emerge from their hiding places in search of shade and water. Charlie seemed to sense this as well. In recent weeks, his demeanor had changed. He was even more alert, his eyes fixed on every detail around him, as if he knew that something was about to happen. Lucas, however, remained carefree, oblivious to the invisible danger lurking in the apparent tranquility of the countryside. For him, summer was the best time to play, run, and feel free. Sarah always made it a point to remind Lucas to be careful. She knew her son couldn't hear the sounds that would alert someone to the presence of dangerous animals, and that's why Charlie's vigilance was essential. One morning, while preparing lunch, she watched the duo play near the hill. Everything seemed normal, but there was something in the air that made her uneasy. As a mother, her instincts told her that danger might be closer than she imagined. As Lucas ran through the fields, he didn't realize that somewhere ahead, a venomous snake was slowly slithering through the tall grass. It was approaching a small puddle where Lucas often stopped to play. Silent and stealthy, the snake advanced unnoticed. But Charlie, ever vigilant, soon picked up on the movement. His eyes darkened, and in an instant, his posture changed completely. Something was wrong. The dog's behavior did not go unnoticed by Lucas. He knew Charlie well enough to understand when the dog became restless. But at that moment, the boy didn't comprehend why. Charlie was agitated, circling around him as if trying to alert him to something. Lucas, however, continued to play, confident that his friend was just excited about the game. The tension in the air began to rise, but to Lucas, everything still felt like a regular morning. For Charlie, however, it was a matter of life and death. The dog moved with urgency, trying to guide the boy away from the area where the snake was hiding. But Lucas didn't understand the gravity of the situation. Time was passing, and the danger was getting closer by the second. Charlie knew he didn't have much time. The strong sun made the snake more aggressive and unpredictable, and the smell of water attracted the reptile. The urgency to get Lucas away from there grew with every step the snake took. But the boy, so immersed in his own bubble, couldn't perceive what was happening around him. Only Charlie's watchful gaze kept the situation under control, albeit temporarily. Sarah, from the porch, couldn't perceive the invisible threat lurking around her son. She trusted the dog, believing he would know how to handle any situation. However, the danger was closer than anyone could imagine. Charlie, on the other hand, felt each second stretch out in silent alertness. The invisible danger was about to reveal itself, and the time to act was running out. The midday heat was beginning to intensify. The sound of the wind rustling the leaves of the trees was soft and constant. But amid this serenity, Charlie's gaze remained fixed on the imminent danger. The snake, hidden in the tall grass, was too close, and every second without action could put Lucas at irreversible risk. Oblivious to the danger, Lucas continued playing near the small puddle of water. He seemed fascinated by the way the sunlight reflected off the gentle ripples, distracted and distant from the reality around him. The tranquility of the scene contrasted violently with the rising tension in Charlie's movements. The border collie, always so calm and controlled, began to move with fierce determination. His instinct urged him to act. He ran toward Lucas, positioning himself between the boy and the place where the snake was stealthily approaching. His movements were precise and calculated, as if he knew exactly what he needed to do to protect his friend. Lucas noticed the sudden change in behavior. Charlie had become more insistent, almost pushing him away from the puddle. The boy, still not understanding the gravity of the situation, thought it was just a game. But the dog's survival instinct left no room for doubt. He needed to get Lucas away from there as quickly as possible. It was at that moment that the snake, hidden in the vegetation, finally revealed itself. Its slippery, long body emerged slowly from the grass, its eyes shining with a silent threat. It was only a few meters away from Lucas and Charlie, and a bite could be fatal. For the boy, that creature was nothing more than an unknown presence, but Charlie knew just how dangerous it was. With a quick and precise movement, the dog lunged toward the snake, barking loudly for the first time that day. The sound surprised Lucas, who rarely saw Charlie act so aggressively. The boy took a step back, confused, as the dog positioned himself between him and the reptile. Every second counted, and Charlie was willing to face anything to protect his friend. The snake, feeling threatened by the dog's sudden approach, raised its head and began to hiss. It was a tense standoff, and any wrong move could have devastating consequences. But Charlie, guided by his protective instinct, did not hesitate. He knew he had to act before the snake could strike at Lucas. Without warning, the snake lunged at the dog. Charlie, however, was quick enough to dodge the initial attack, using his agility to keep the serpent away from the boy. The battle between the two continued, and although Lucas couldn't hear the warning sounds of the snake, he finally realized how serious Charlie's behavior was. Sarah's heart raced as she spotted the unusual scene from a distance. Something was wrong. Charlie's behavior, once so calm, was now frantic and aggressive. She couldn't see the snake from where she was, but her maternal instinct told her that something was threatening her son. Without a second thought, she dropped what she was doing and began to run toward the field, fear growing in her chest. Charlie, for his part, remained focused. His body moved with agility, dodging the snake's attacks while trying to draw it away from Lucas. With every step, he led the boy farther from danger, keeping the serpent occupied. It was a risky game, but Charlie was willing to do whatever it took to protect Lucas. The situation was critical, and the dog's survival instinct was at its peak. The battle raged on, but Charlie was determined to win. He knew he couldn't let his guard down, for any slip could be fatal. But time was on his side. Sarah's presence, drawing closer, gave him renewed hope that the worst could be avoided. Sarah ran as fast as she could toward Lucas, her heart racing with fear of what she might find. The distance between her and her son seemed endless, but her determination to get there in time propelled her forward. She saw Charlie's figure moving constantly, but she couldn't identify what was happening. Something told her that the situation was grave, and panic began to take over. Meanwhile, Charlie continued to confront the snake, aware that time was his enemy. He knew Sarah was on her way, but he also understood that he needed to keep the serpent away from Lucas until help arrived. The border collie moved with astonishing speed, dodging the snake's attacks while simultaneously keeping Lucas out of danger. The battle was at its climax, and the outcome would be decisive. Finally grasping the seriousness of the situation, Lucas took a few steps back, his eyes fixed on the conflict between Charlie and the snake. He wanted to help, but he didn't know how. Charlie's natural protective instinct kept him at a distance, and the boy felt helplessness growing within him. His heart raced, and he finally began to understand that his loyal friend was fighting for his life. Furious with the dog's resistance, the snake launched another violent attack. This time, however, Charlie couldn't dodge in time. The serpent sank its fangs into the side of the dog, and the impact was immediate. The border collie let out a muffled whine, but did not retreat. Even injured, he knew he couldn't let the snake get close to Lucas. With all his remaining strength, Charlie made one last leap toward the snake, pushing it away from the boy for good. Charlie's willpower was enough to repel the snake, which, finally defeated, slowly slithered away into the brush, disappearing into the tall vegetation. The immediate danger had passed, but the price paid by the dog was high. Charlie, now exhausted and wounded, could barely stand. He looked at Lucas, his eyes reflecting the unwavering loyalty and deep love he felt for the boy. When Sarah finally reached the scene, her heart sank at the sight. Charlie lay motionless on the ground, injured, while Lucas, still in shock, knelt beside the dog, his eyes welling with tears. Sarah quickly crouched down and, with trembling hands, examined the border collie. The snake bite was visible, and she knew the venom was already circulating through Charlie's body. The reality of the situation hit her hard. Charlie had saved Lucas's life, putting his own at risk. Now, his life was hanging by a thread, and Sarah knew she had to act quickly. With a heavy heart, she scooped Charlie into her arms, fully aware that time was short. She looked at Lucas, trying to remain calm, but the pain in her eyes was unmistakable. She needed to get Charlie to the veterinarian immediately. Lucas, still processing what had happened, followed his mother in silence, his face marked by confusion and sadness. He didn't know what would become of his friend, but he felt that something inside him had changed forever. Charlie's sacrifice would not be forgotten. The silence between mother and son as they ran back home was heavy, filled with a pain that words could not describe. The journey back home felt endless, and the urgency to save Charlie burned in Sarah's chest. She knew the nearest veterinarian was a considerable distance away, and every second counted. However, the sacrifice Charlie had made was already etched in the memory of everyone there, and the dog's fate, no matter how uncertain, was forever intertwined with that of the boy he loved so much. Before we continue with this exciting story, make sure you are already subscribed to the channel and leave a like on this video to always stay up to date with new content. The sun still shone brightly in the sky, but for Sarah and Lucas, time seemed to have stopped. With each step, the weight of Charlie's body in her arms grew heavier, and the sound of hurried footsteps on the gravel was the only thing breaking the desperate silence between mother and son. The dog was visibly weak, breathing heavily, and Sarah knew that every lost minute could cost him his life. The race against time had begun, and the tension in the air was palpable. As they ran toward the truck parked next to the house, Sarah tried to focus on staying calm. Lucas, on the other hand, remained silent, his eyes fixed on the dog in his lap. The boy couldn't fully grasp the gravity of the situation, but he knew something was terribly wrong. His mind spun in a whirlwind of confusing emotions, fear, guilt, and hope. He felt powerless, unable to do anything to help his faithful friend. As soon as they reached the truck, Sarah carefully placed Charlie in the back seat, trying not to worsen the dog's injuries. She shut the door with a swift motion and jumped into the driver's seat without wasting a moment. Her trembling hands could barely grip the steering wheel as she turned on the engine. With a firm look, she cast one last glance at Lucas, sitting beside Charlie, before speeding down the dirt road. The road to the veterinarian was long and winding, but Sarah knew it by heart. The challenge now was to arrive in time. Every pothole in the road felt like a giant obstacle, and with every bump, Charlie's condition became more evident. The dog's breathing grew weaker, and Sarah's concern heightened with each passing minute. As she drove, she thought about everything Charlie had done for her family. Since the first day they adopted him, he had been more than just a pet. He was a protector, a loyal companion, and now a hero. The sacrifice the dog made to save Lucas was something she would never forget. And even though she was focused on reaching the veterinarian, her mind began to prepare for the worst. The snake's venom could have already taken hold of Charlie's body. In the back seat, Lucas gently stroked Charlie's head, trying to stay calm. He didn't know what to say or how to react. The dog who had always been by his side now seemed distant, struggling to survive. The silence between them was deafening, but Lucas felt that his friend was still there, fighting with all his strength. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to hold back tears, but the reality of what was happening hit him like a tidal wave. The journey felt endless. Every kilometer stretched into eternity. Sarah knew that time was against them, but she couldn't let despair take over. Charlie's life depended on her now. In her mind, she repeated mantras of encouragement, trying to convince herself that there was still hope. "Hang in there, buddy," she thought as she pressed down on the accelerator a little harder. When they finally spotted the veterinary clinic's sign, the relief was immediate but short-lived. There was still much to be done, and time continued to tick away against them. The veterinarian had already been notified by phone, and the staff was ready when Sarah slammed to a stop in front of the building. Without hesitation, she jumped out of the car and, with the help of one of the assistants, carried Charlie inside the clinic. Lucas followed closely, watching with anxious eyes as they took his friend away. He wanted to run after Charlie, but he knew that at that moment, all he could do was wait. The boy stood beside his mother, once again feeling the weight of helplessness. Now, all they could do was trust the veterinarian and hope for the best. As the emergency room door closed behind Charlie, Sarah felt a wave of exhaustion hit her. She leaned against the wall, trying to control her breathing. The waiting began, bringing with it all the uncertainties and fears she had been trying to suppress. Lucas, still silent, sat down beside her, not knowing exactly what to do or say. The sound of the clock ticking on the waiting room wall was the only thing filling the heavy silence. Every second felt like an eternity, and the outcome of this race against time was now in the hands of fate. The waiting room of the veterinary clinic felt increasingly smaller as Sarah and Lucas awaited news about Charlie. The ticking of the clock on the wall was the only sound filling the space, each second echoing like a dull thud in Sarah's heart. She looked at her son, who remained silent, his eyes fixed on the emergency room door. Lucas's expression was tight, as if he were trying, in his young mind, to find a way to process everything that had happened that day. Time passed slowly. Sarah tried to remain calm, but the weight of uncertainty made her chest feel tight. She thought back to the last few hours, the frantic run to the vet, Charlie's bravery in protecting Lucas. Their dog had sacrificed everything for them, and now his life was in the hands of professionals who were fighting against time, just as they had fought to get there. The snake's venom had already spread, and the chance of saving Charlie seemed to grow more distant. Lucas, sitting in a chair beside his mother, hadn't said a word. He felt the heavy silence around him, but the emotions inside him were chaotic. The boy still couldn't fully understand what was happening. His heart was filled with fear and uncertainty, but there was a small part of him that refused to believe Charlie wouldn't come out of that room. To Lucas, Charlie was more than a dog. He was his companion, his protector, and he couldn't imagine life without him. The boy clung to that hope, even if it was fragile. As the minutes dragged on, the veterinarian finally appeared at the emergency room door. He wore a serious expression, causing Sarah's heart to nearly stop. She immediately stood up, feeling a chill run down her spine. The veterinarian walked over to them and, with a grave look, began to speak, carefully choosing his words. "Charlie is in critical condition," he said calmly. "The snake's venom spread rapidly, and we are doing everything we can to neutralize it. However, it's still too early to say if he will respond to treatment." Those words fell like a weight on Sarah. She felt her legs weaken for a moment, but steadied herself, taking a deep breath to try to contain her despair. The idea of losing Charlie was something she didn't want to accept, but she knew she needed to be prepared for the worst. She looked at Lucas, hoping her son was handling the news well, but the boy remained silent, his eyes filled with deep sorrow. The veterinarian continued explaining the next steps in the treatment. He talked about the medications they were using, the attempts to stabilize Charlie's vital signs, and the need for observation in the coming hours. Everything felt like a blur in Sarah's mind as she tried to process the gravity of the situation. The veterinarian's words echoed, but her mind was focused on the dog who, at that moment, was fighting for his life behind that closed door. "The important thing now is to wait," the veterinarian concluded. "Charlie is a strong dog. If anyone can overcome this, it's him." Those last words, though laden with uncertainty, sparked a small flame of hope in Sarah's heart. She knew how resilient Charlie was, how much he had already overcome over the years. If there was any chance of recovery, she trusted her faithful companion would fight to the end. The veterinarian left, leaving Sarah and Lucas alone once again. The agonizing wait would continue, but now at least they knew Charlie was receiving the best possible treatment. Lucas finally broke the silence, speaking in a low, hesitant voice. "He's going to be okay, right, Mom?" the boy asked, the uncertainty clear in his voice. Sarah looked at her son and, unsure how to respond definitively, gently stroked his hair. "I hope so, sweetheart. Let's pray that he will." Night began to fall, and the darkness outside seemed to reflect the uncertainty that loomed over them. The lights of the veterinary clinic glowed faintly as Sarah and Lucas continued their silent vigil. The wait, though agonizing, was now the only thing they could do. Every passing minute was a mixture of hope and fear, and Charlie's fate remained uncertain. Deep down, Sarah felt that regardless of what happened, Charlie had already played his heroic role. He had given everything to protect Lucas, and that would never be forgotten. Now, all that remained was to wait and believe that their loyal companion could survive yet another battle. Night had fully descended when the veterinarian returned to the waiting room. The look on his face was serious, but not devoid of compassion. Sarah, who had been sitting beside Lucas for hours, immediately stood up. The fatigue in her body was evident, but the love and concern for Charlie gave her strength. Lucas, for his part, remained silent, but his eyes expressed a mix of fear and hope. The veterinarian began to speak calmly, explaining what had been done up to that point. They had managed to stabilize Charlie temporarily, but the snake venom had caused more damage than they had initially anticipated. Charlie's system was weakened, and the next few hours would be crucial. The intensive treatment had its limitations, and the veterinarian could not promise that the dog would get through this without further complications. Sarah listened attentively, each word from the veterinarian being absorbed with difficulty. She wanted to be strong for her son. She wanted to believe that Charlie would come out of there alive. But the veterinarian's careful tone made it clear that the moment to make a difficult decision was approaching. "We need to discuss the options," he said finally, with a look of understanding. "There is a chance that Charlie can recover, but it's small. The treatment will be long and delicate, and he will suffer quite a bit during the process." Those words hit Sarah like a blow. She knew what that meant. She had to think about Charlie's well-being, not just her desire to have him by her side. It was the hardest decision any pet owner could face: to allow their friend to fight and suffer more, or to let him rest in peace. Lucas, sitting in the chair, stared intently at the veterinarian, trying to understand the situation. He knew something serious was happening, but he still didn't fully grasp the gravity of what was being decided. Sarah, on the other hand, was already feeling the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. The thought of losing Charlie devastated her, but the idea of prolonging his suffering was unbearable. "I need to know if you want us to continue with the treatment knowing the risks, or if you prefer to stop and let him go without pain," the veterinarian said gently. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to hold back the tears. Lucas looked at her, searching for some kind of answer. He knew that the final decision was not his to make, but he wanted to believe that Charlie still had the strength to carry on. The boy had always trusted his dog, and the thought of losing his friend was overwhelming. "Can we think about it for a bit?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "Of course," the veterinarian replied. "There's no rush to make a decision. I know how difficult this is." With a nod, Sarah sat back down, feeling the weight of the world on her shoulders. The room felt colder now, quieter. She looked at Lucas, who still had hope in his eyes, and her heart ached. How could she explain to him that sometimes the most loving choice is to let go? As she tried to organize her thoughts, Lucas spoke for the first time since they had received the news. "I think he wants to rest," the boy said in a thin voice. "He's already done so much for me. I don't want him to suffer anymore." Sarah looked at her son, surprised by his maturity. Lucas's words, though painful, were true. Charlie had been a hero. He had given everything for them, and perhaps now was the time to allow him to rest in peace. She knew that the right decision was this one, even though her heart was breaking. With teary eyes, Sarah made a silent decision. She knew what needed to be done, even if it was the hardest choice of her life. Charlie deserved peace. He deserved to leave with dignity, surrounded by the love of his family. She stood up again and walked over to the veterinarian, who was waiting patiently on the other side of the room. Taking a deep breath and with a heavy heart, she gave the answer he knew was coming. "Let him rest," she said, her voice low and filled with emotion. The veterinarian nodded with an understanding and respectful look. "I'll give you a moment to say goodbye," he said softly before stepping out of the room. Sarah returned to Lucas, and together they awaited the moment to say farewell to their faithful companion. The wait was now different, laden with deep sadness, but also gratitude. Gratitude for everything Charlie had done for them. The dog had been a hero, a friend, and a protector, and his legacy would live on forever in their hearts. The emergency room was silent as Sarah and Lucas were led to where Charlie rested. The space was illuminated by a soft, warm light, creating a sense of peace amidst the sorrow. Charlie lay on a small bed, with tubes still attached to his body, but he seemed calm, as if he were simply sleeping. His eyes were closed, and his breathing, though weak, was rhythmic. Seeing him there, still and vulnerable, made Sarah's tears well up again. She knew this was the moment to say goodbye, the moment to let her beloved dog go in peace. Lucas, by her side, remained quiet, watching Charlie with a deep look of sadness and love. The boy, who had always been so close to his dog, was facing the harsh reality of losing his best friend. They slowly approached Charlie, and Sarah knelt beside him, stroking his soft fur. She whispered words of affection, thanking him for all the love and protection he had given their family. Each touch was a silent farewell, each caress a reminder of the unbreakable bond between them. Lucas, although young, approached with surprising maturity. He gently held one of Charlie's paws, just as he had since he was little. The boy didn't say a word, but his gesture spoke volumes. There he was, beside his dog, in the final moments of a friendship that had defined much of his childhood. Lucas knew that Charlie had been more than a pet. He was part of the family, an unwavering protector who never hesitated to put their lives above his own. The veterinarian entered discreetly, giving Sarah and Lucas the space they needed. He knew how difficult this moment was and patiently waited for the final procedure. Charlie's assisted death would be peaceful and painless, a last gift of tranquility for a dog that had given everything. Sarah looked at Lucas, seeking comfort in her son's presence, and together they nodded to the veterinarian. It was time. They knew they were making the right choice, even if that choice brought pain. Love sometimes meant letting go. The veterinarian approached, calmly explaining what would happen next. He connected a small syringe to Charlie's tube, the solution that would bring the final rest to the dog. Silently, he administered the injection, and Sarah held Lucas's hand tightly, trying to provide him with the emotional support they both needed. As the seconds passed, Sarah felt Charlie's body start to relax even more, his breathing slowing until it ceased altogether. Lucas squeezed Charlie's paw tighter, trying to prolong that last touch, as if he wanted to forever keep the feeling of having him there by his side. Silence enveloped the room. There was no more soft breathing from Charlie, no more sounds from the machines. Everything was still, as if time had paused for a brief moment to acknowledge the loss of a special being. Sarah bowed her head, allowing the tears to flow freely. She knew this was the final farewell, the last goodbye. Lucas, beside her, said nothing, but his eyes were filled with tears he was trying to hold back. The loss was profound, but there was a certain peace in the air, the peace of knowing that Charlie was no longer suffering. They remained beside Charlie for a few more minutes, in no hurry to leave. Those moments were precious, the final chapter of a story marked by love, loyalty, and sacrifice. The dog who had given everything for his family was now at rest, and his legacy would live on in the hearts of Sarah and Lucas forever. With a deep sigh, Sarah stood up, still stroking Charlie's head one last time. She looked at Lucas, who also silently said his farewell, and together they left the room, knowing that this day would forever mark their lives. As they exited the veterinary office, The night was cold and quiet. Sarah gazed at the starry sky, feeling grateful for the time they had spent with Charlie. He had been a true hero, and his memory would be cherished forever. Lucas, walking beside his mother, wiped away his tears, and although the void in his heart was great, he knew that Charlie would always be with them in some way. The last goodbye had been said, but the love and loyalty of Charlie would remain alive, like a flame that never goes out. He had been the family's guardian, and even in his departure, his spirit continued to protect them, bringing comfort and memories of a life lived with courage and dedication. Thanks for watching until the end. What did you think of today's story? Leave your opinion in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Until next time.